actually lost my partner in a car accident when I was 26. It hasn't been easy for me. It is such a tragedy that you are trying to figure out how to deal with it. And dealing with it is hard. When you zoom out, one is the light switch, and that is facing. I've actually worked with men in their 70s who have lost their wives, and they can relate to me because more than people who have not gone through an experience like that. Tim Grover said, "The best of the best always want to get better."
Welcome to the Derelict Podcast. For the disparaged, depleted, and delinquent souls trying to find our way, we're talking about the scary part of the journey, where we don't know how it'll end. Let's be free to face our fucking failures in real time as the most unadulterated, truest version of who we are. No sugarcoating. Welcome to the shit show, you derelict.
Welcome back to another episode of the Derelict Podcast. My name is Josh, and I have a very special guest here today. We'll get to her in just a moment, but here's my question for you as we're starting off. Have you gone through a relationship transition ever in your life? Maybe it was for a long-term partnership. Maybe it was a marriage. Maybe it ended in divorce. Maybe it ended in you throwing the other person's stuff out the window of an apartment. I don't know what it is, but our very special guest today is Kavita, and Kavita is a dating expert, and she actually works with a lot of men, which most of you are that are watching this, but maybe the women are going to be interested in what she has to say as well. So we are going to talk about several things from her. We're going to talk about her. Well, one of the things that I really want to talk with you about, Kavita, that we'll get to is the dating dial, which is kind of an understanding of like when to date, when to step back into dating, etc. So stay tuned for that. But first, Kavita Ajwani.
Yep.
Yes, I nailed it. So glad you're here. Thanks for coming.
Josh, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're very welcome. So maybe for the listeners, before we jump into kind of some of your really practical stuff, which I'm stoked to get into, tell us a little bit about your story. Like, how does one become a dating coach? I'm really curious. How does that happen?
My favorite question to answer, so much so that it's such a conversation starter that I remember when I used to go out to networking events or even just out, like I would almost turn down my dial, which we'll get into more in terms of like, depending on how much I wanted to chat that day, I would either share what I did for a living or I would just say something like marketing. So marketing doesn't really invite like too many questions, but as soon as I said anything in the realm of dating, didn't matter if you're single or not, everybody wants to know what you're doing. But I actually started out.
Can I tell you a quick story on that too, and then I want to hear the rest of your story. So most of my experience has been in financial coaching. That's actually what I do. I still have a financial coaching company along with the coaching that I do for men. But in the financial space, I was a financial planner. And literally the way that I knew to get rid of anyone at a networking event is I would just look them in the eye and be like, I'm a financial planner. And just everyone would run away.
Yeah,
it's the last thing they want to talk about, right?
Financial planner, accountant, even marketing can be like a little bit risky, but I couldn't pull off accountant. So, but I actually owned a speed dating company for many, many years. So we were speed dating. We had a matchmaking agency and coaching. So it was all rolled into one, but it all started from speed dating events.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. And what got you into that? Why did you want to do speed dating? There's got to be some sort of personal story here, and you don't need to get super personal if you don't want to, but I mean, was it like a failed relationship? Was it something where you're like, I'm the best at relationships ever, therefore I have to go tell everybody? I mean, what was the why?
You know what? I think this is the first time I'm going to say this, which is, I think it was like a universal, the universe's decision for me, because there was no real why behind this. I had a corporate job in my early 20s, and I saw this ad on Craigslist for a speed dating host. And this company was based out of Australia. I'm here in Canada, and I wanted this job so badly. And I don't know why. It just sounded so exciting. And I thought tooth and nail to get it. For 6 months, I kept applying and applying. Wow. I would actually call them and say I had a missed call. And they were like, nope, nobody called you. And then eventually 6 months later, they finally did call me, interviewed me, and I ended up getting this part-time job as a speed dating host. So the whole thing was very out of character for me to be so relentless to get a job. I really didn't love working that much at that age. Um, so I think I was just meant for this because it led me down this path. And that was, my gosh, like 15, 16 years ago. I don't know anymore. I can't count anymore.
That's persistence. I mean, I love so many things about that story. First of all, I love the fact that it was on Craigslist. Like that just already has so much
I
goodness
have
about
to
it.
throw that in.
Yeah, I back in the day I used to try to hire people from Craigslist before a lot of these, sites came up, and it was a mess. So I can only imagine what the other side was going through, right, with all these applications and everything. But the thing I think I love the most about it is the fact that you would just call and be like, "Oh yeah, I missed a call." It's relentless.
That's
I love
me.
it.
That if anybody really wants to like know me, like I really go after what I want. I have a funny story if we get into it later about my boyfriend and how I kind of made sure to
I
get
would
his
love to hear that. Yeah, I was
attention.
just gonna say I know that that's shown up in relationships for you before, so I
Yeah,
definitely want to hear about that.
yeah,
For sure. That's awesome. Well, so I think maybe the first thing that I want to dive into, if you're open to it, is just so, everybody that's listening to this already knows this. You may not know this, but I have gone through many relationships I shouldn't say many relationships, makes it sound really egotistical. I've had several long-term relationships in my life. I've technically had four that were like really, I would call long-term partner type material, not go on a date here or there, whatever, right? There's been four. So it seems like a lot, at least to me. But one of those lasted 16 years. So the other ones were a year or two, at the most. My most recent one was 3 months ago. As of the time of this recording, it was 2 years long. So I've had several experiences of going through these things. I've also had very different experiences as far as the transition. And more specifically, one of the questions that I want to dive into with you is when you know you're ready for that transition and what that looks like. Because I can tell you from my own personal experience, every single relationship has taught me something for the next relationship because I've tried to pay attention. And then I try to figure out a smoother transition the next time. And obviously, it doesn't always happen. But I guess I just kind of want to start there. Like, how do you, let's just assume for the listeners right now that they've been in some sort of long-term relationship, or maybe they still are in a long-term relationship. Maybe they're thinking about getting out of that long-term relationship, or maybe they just did. How do you step back into dating? How do you figure that out?
yeah. I think uh, there's so many directions to go in, and it's such a gray area because it really depends on maybe how long the last relationship was, what you went through, are kids involved, is it a divorce? Like, are you going through challenging things that you truly need to heal from? And so there's a whole area there that we can unpack. But on a surface level, if we're starting on the surface level, I mean, number one, I would love to be able to tell someone that to follow their intuition at
Mm,
first. Um, And if you are feeling a little bit scared, if you're feeling a little bit scared but called to it, I would recommend just dipping your toes, right? Because you are going to find out so much more from dabbling in the dating scene. And you don't, a lot of people will say to me like, "Oh, I don't want to put other people's feelings at risk. I don't want to." And it's like, "Hold on a second. You can date and explore dating without even really going on a date, right? See how you feel getting on a dating app. See how you feel, like go explore a speed dating event. Maybe don't go, but find one, go sit at the bar where one is taking place and just kind of put yourself in that energy and see how you feel. If you're like, whoa, my gosh, there's no way, that'll be a really strong tell. And if it looks exciting, if you're like kind of getting those good vibes, then that's a strong tell. So I think stepping into it even a little bit is the best way to get the wheels in motion and being able to rely on your intuition if that's the right move for you right now.
absolutely. I think that's great advice. And you've mentioned intuition and universe so far. So I just want to spend a moment on that because I've talked about this on the podcast before. I firmly believe now, after having so many different conversations with so many different people, that we all call this thing the same thing. And let me explain what it is. Some people call it intuition. Some people call it gut. Some people call it God. Some people call it universe. or maybe some other word for God or universe, higher power, something else, right? But what I've noticed is that every time somebody has this conversation, it's really talking about the same thing. It's really talking about, is there something either internal, maybe external, maybe both, that's giving me this, like you use the word intuition, you also use the word universe of, the pieces are actually coming together. And I think that is huge because I've noticed in my life, the more I don't listen to that, the more trouble I get into. And I can point back to most of the failures or struggles or difficulties that I've had in my life. And I felt something. I knew something was the right thing to do. I didn't do it. And then it just caused more pain.
Yeah.
So I think that's huge. I think it's huge. How would you say people, do you have any advice on somebody being able to listen to that more?
Hmm. I think one just nice way to think about it is like just giving it a name, like the whispers or the nudges, like when something is kind of like showing up again and again. So like just start to pay attention. It can feel weird to like trust it right away if you're new to this kind of work, but the whisper, I like to call them the whispers. But what you'll notice is that the more you connect with yourself, the more time you spend in silence, the more time you, if you meditate, do breath work, spend time in nature, like the quieter you get. And that's why whispers work so nicely, is like the quieter you get, like you have to be quiet to hear the whispers. So when we are constantly, and this is very, really being in your masculine energy of being in this constant mode of doing, go, constantly distracting yourself with action items by taking action, it can be very challenging to hear what's right for you. So it's actually slowing down and quieting down that will help you connect and start to similarly experiment with, okay, I'm hearing this, what if I leaned into this a little bit, what if I listen now and see where it takes me, right? I think in a lot of cases we are always like this all or nothing kind of society where it doesn't have to be that way. I speak to a lot of people and it's like, hey, well, I'm going to get back into dating, so downloading all the apps, I'm signing up for the speed, like let's take it easy. And then you can, by doing that, you end up overwhelming yourself. The, first sign of rejection, you end up retreating all the way back because you're actually not prepared. Versus, and on this topic, it's like, okay, you don't have to go to a 10-day silent meditation to begin the work.
Right. Right. Yeah. So I love what you just said. And where it puts my mind to is, well, I'm gonna say a pet peeve and then I'm gonna say something maybe we're gonna disagree on. So we'll have a good conversation here. And that is one of my biggest pet peeves. And by the way, let me just start with raising my hand and say that I've failed at this several times. And that is jumping into another relationship right after the last relationship ends. People often call it rebounding. I would call it medicating. I think most people do it because of the fact that there's some sort of healing and grief and trauma and whatever that they have to get over and they don't want to deal with it. So instead of, kind of the typical way we think about medicating where somebody breaks up and then they go drink themselves, into a stupor, other people use relationships to do that. They use sex, they use love, they use dating, they use validation. And they are me because I've used all those things in the past. So I'm not judging anybody for that because I've definitely done it a lot. However, there's this phrase that I hate that is time heals all wounds. And I think that phrase is completely inaccurate. My friend Veronica and I, she's been on the podcast several times, talk about this all the time because I just hate that phrase because time doesn't heal wounds. And let me prove it to everybody that doesn't agree with me. Sit down with somebody that has the same bitterness and resentment 20 years later than whenever it started. Time didn't heal that wound because they didn't work on it, right? They didn't do the healing, they didn't do the work, etc. So I guess my question to you then is, I know that there's not some magical timeline, right? Like some people say, hey, it's half the time that you dated that you have to be single. I was like, I don't think that that's accurate just based on my own personal experience and people I've
Yeah.
worked with. I don't know if you think that's accurate. Or it's just like, oh, you need 3 months or you need 6 months or you need a year. It's just these random dates, right? But I guess my question to you is, it's two parts. So we'll come to the second part in a moment. But the first part is, how do you know that? Is that like the whispers you talked about? Is that something you help clients with? Is kind of whispering as well, like helping their intuition also to try to figure out if they're ready or not? Like how does somebody know that?
Absolutely. So I will help clients that way, which is what is getting in the way of you having clarity for your own needs, right? And how do we create that clarity? How do we remove those obstacles? And that comes back to these, practices. So developing a system or a routine of frameworks that allows someone to find that clarity within
Yeah.
themselves. And also just, even in coaching, like it's a form of therapy. So it's like talk therapy, and actually talking, right, will get you to that point of, so a question that, with a client we would dive into in a coaching session would be, am I ready to date?
Mm,
I can't answer that for them, right? And exactly
right.
what you said, it is so different because the relationship doesn't the word relationship doesn't really matter, right? I was in a relationship, but what does that mean? Like, how were you even, were you completely disconnected for the last 1 year, 6 years? Were you completely attached and this blindsided you, right? So if I'm speaking to someone, I can make some generalizations. Like if I speak to someone who was in a marriage that, this is actually a real um, client experience where I had a client, he was in a marriage for 16 years. It was the only woman that he had ever dated, married her, and now he's in his early 40s. And it completely blindsided him. He had no idea. So the classic story, she walks in, I'm out, and he's left like, wow, I had no idea this was going to happen. Should he jump immediately into the dating scene?
Definitely not.
Probably not,
No.
right? Like, however, should she jump back in the dating scene? Maybe, if that was on her mind and she was disconnected for the last 2 years. So it really, I agree with you completely. There is no formula. There is no 3 months. There's no wait this long. It's really not about that.
There was something that my so I worked with a therapist pretty intensely while I was going through my divorce process, and there was something that he said to me that I'll never forget. And he said, "Look, you can do this work while you're dating someone. It's just going to take a lot longer and it's a lot harder."
Hmm.
He's like, "So you choose. Feel free to go date somebody, do whatever you need to do, and work on yourself at the same time." He's like, "But I'm just letting you know that if you just take some time and you take some space and you really focus on yourself and your healing process and all these things we're talking about, it's just going to go smoother." And I thought that was a really good way of saying it without necessarily just making a line in the sand, right? That's not a black and white answer. It's just, and I found it to be true in the several relationships I've been in. The ones that I have paused and spent time healing myself, trying to figure out what went wrong, try to figure out what my part in it most importantly was, and try to figure out what I want for the next relationship. The next relationships always ended up better than the
Hmm.
ones where it ends and then the next day I'm like, woo, I'm free.
Hmm.
Let's go find somebody.
Yeah.
It just never seems to work very well. So I appreciate that. I think that's good insight.
Well, what I'm hearing from you is like you're not stopping the pursuit of love and a relationship. Like even doing the reflection work and taking ownership for what went wrong and what you want to do better is still in the realm of love and relationships. Like you are still working on improving yourself for that next thing. And I think one of the problems I see, and I get this in the DMs all the time, where people are just, they're so far removed from the idea like of being in a relationship. Like they are so scared, they're so traumatized, they're
Mm,
so, and this could even be from just never even having a relationship. So now they're just afraid it's never going to happen for them. So they've gone on the defense to be like, I don't need anyone. I don't want anyone. And
right.
then when that happens, you are really separating yourself just from love, partnership, this beautiful thing that's available to you. So even when you're saying that, it's like you're not, and maybe this is the right time to get into it. You tell me, you're not turning off the dating dial. And I think you're not turning it all the way down to
I
zero.
think it is a good time to get into it, because one of the things that you said when we were chatting before the podcast that I thought was really intriguing, that I wanted to bring up a little bit, is the fact that you were talking about basically how you can still learn about dating, where you don't necessarily have to jump in all the way, but you can
Mhm.
kind of be learning. And you referenced it earlier too, when you're talking about, hey, maybe I want to dabble a little bit. Maybe I just want to, like, every relationship doesn't have to be this long-term, intense, intimate relationship, right?
Mhm.
It could just be, hey, let's go grab a coffee and I can
Yeah.
have a conversation with you. And maybe that's helped me in the past, after I've gotten out of a long-term relationship and I'm feeling insecure and I'm feeling unconfident. Unconfident? Is that a word? I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm
Yeah.
not feeling confident. I'm feeling insecure. I'm feeling like nobody wants me. I feel, all these feelings that sometimes come up, especially if the other person ends it, right? And what I've found is that once I feel like my gut's kind of saying, okay, I think maybe you're ready to dabble a little bit, which for me, I have to talk to friends about. I have to talk to people that I love that hold me accountable, which, I would recommend everybody talk to you for that, because you're not going to BS them. I can already tell that about
Yeah.
you, right?
No, there's no BSing here.
And honestly, I think most people's friends will bullshit them. So be really careful of that too, everybody listening right now. I personally think that a lot of them will, under the guise of like they want what's best for you. It's not like they're trying to hurt you. It's just that, they want you to be happy. Like, I'll take an example of like my mom, right? My mom, after my marriage, she just wanted me to be happy. So she's like, get out there and do the, blah, blah. And this is a woman that hasn't dated in, however many 40 something years, right? But it was just because she loved me and just because she cared for me and just because she wanted what's best for me. But what she wasn't able to do, because she's not that person in my life, is she wasn't able to see like, no, 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 I need to process these things. I need to heal from these things. I need to learn. So I guess one of my questions for you too is that I wonder how many men you work with specifically that are like me, where and maybe this guy in his 40s that was married for 16 years, he might fall in this category. But I know for me, especially after my divorce, more so than my other relationships, but especially after that one, because that relationship was 16 years, just like this guy's was. After that, I found that it was really hard for me to be by myself. I found solitude very difficult. I talk about isolation versus solitude sometimes, right? Like you're saying, if I'm this cynical person and I don't believe in dating anymore and I don't believe in love anymore, then you isolate, right? That's not healthy. Solitude is healthy. Solitude is, I'm going to get by myself. I'm going to work on myself. I'm going to do these things. I'm going to pray or meditate or read or whatever I'm doing, right? I'm just curious, how many men do you work with some men that just have a hard time just like sitting with themselves and actually going through this process they need to go through?
100%.
Mm.
Not 100% of the time, but at some point in their journey, because to be in your masculine energy is, and it sucks because not being in your masculine energy sucks. That's not what I'm saying at all. All of us need to be in our masculine
I'm going to
energy.
clip that for social media. It's going to say
Yeah,
being in your masculine energy sucks.
exactly. It
And that's
sucks.
going to be the
It
post. And then you're going to
says
get mad at me.
the
And then you're like, I'm
female
never going back to that podcast ever again.
the female dating coach for men. Um, no, but that's kind of what I was talking about before, where to be in that space of constantly doing because because we don't want to feel the feelings, because we don't want to sit back and get quiet, that is being in your masculine energy, and it has a time and a place that serves you in the most magical ways. But stopping to actually listen to what's happening inside and feel the feelings, that's the hard part in these moments, to actually go through and face what's really going on. Turning off the podcast while you're even brushing your teeth and right before you go to bed, like that constant noise to distract yourself all the time. And it's challenging. Like, it is really challenging to just be in silence.
It is.
Um,
Yeah. And
but,
I, obviously this is not exclusive to men. Women do this as well.
oh,
But
yes.
I don't know about your experience, but from my experience, what I've seen most in my life, and again, this is very limited, so I'm not saying this is what happens everywhere, but in my life, what I've seen is the majority of women that I know that get out of a long-term relationship that don't want to deal with it, jump back into another relationship immediately. And the majority of men that I know that get out of a relationship and don't want to deal with it jump into work immediately. And I know that that's not always the case. It just seems like both of those things are still doing the same thing.
Yep.
I'm still not sitting and dealing with these difficult emotions, these difficult things. Now, the other thing I think is really important too, and maybe you've seen this also, is that I have to be really careful when I'm sitting in my emotion that I'm not wallowing in it also, because there's that side where I'm just always sitting in this ucky, sick,
Yeah.
sad, depressed state. And then that can lead to depression, which leads to long-term depression, which can lead to very bad things, obviously.
Yeah.
There's that side of it. But then there's the other side of it is I'm just going to put my head down. I'm going to work. I'm going to work out a bunch. I'm going to get a 6-pack. I'm going to, just spend all this time doing all these other things. I'm going to build these things in my garage, like whatever. Right.
Yeah.
Where I'm also not doing it. Or I can be, addicted to learning where I'm listening to podcasts 24/7 while I'm doing everything else and, that sort of thing too.
Yeah.
Right.
So what's the, sorry, I lost the question.
I don't know if there was a question.
Okay.
I was getting to a question. I
Yeah.
think my question is what, let's see, let me formulate this question for a second. What are some ways do you think if somebody is in that state where maybe they're not feeling quite ready to date again, what are some ways for them to, let's say, learn about dating or learn about what they look like in dating without actually feeling too committed to jump back into relationships if their heart's still hurting? Does that question make sense?
So the example that you gave earlier, I think this will help your audience just understand exactly what this means, is the example you gave earlier about dabbling, when you reflected it back to me, dabbling into dating, um, downloading the app, going to a speed dating event, going for coffee. I would say that's like really turning up the dial on your dating life. So I have this idea and this concept of the dating dial. It's a philosophy I use with my clients where when we meet, we get into where they're at. Are they freshly out of a relationship? Have they not been in a relationship for 10 years? And together we decide, what are we doing with this dial? Where are we at right now? Are we totally turned down? Are we at a 0 right now? Are you dating constantly and nothing's working? Like, are you dialed up at 100? And we're trying to find the right balance between your dating life and actively working on or actively dating versus your growth, your hobbies, your career, all the other things. And so to give you an example, downloading a dating app, going on a coffee date, I would say is like turning up the dial to like 40%. You're actually going to go and meet a single woman and sit in front of her for coffee with both of you knowing the intention behind it is ultimately romantic. That's like pretty high on the dial. Downloading a dating app is maybe like 20%. What I think is that what you were sharing before about where not dating at all, but doing that reflection work and it's there in the background, that's like a 10% dial. And I don't recommend if it is important to you to find a relationship, if it is important to you to find partnership, 10% should be like the lowest your dial ever goes. And what that can look like is the learning side of things, reading about love languages, attachment theory, listening to some podcasts, being inspired by healthy, happy relationships, right? It could be spending time with a couple friend of yours and asking them for relationship advice. So there is a way to learn and engage and work towards that dream without actually stepping into the arena, so to speak, in a physical way.
I think that makes a lot of sense because what I hear you saying is at 0%, you're cynical. You're like, I don't
Yes.
want anything. I don't want to ever do this again. I've been hurt too much. Everybody's a fucking monster, right? Like none of it's my fault. Like victim mentality and all that sort of stuff is probably at 0%, right?
Yeah.
So I love what you're saying about 10% because that to me is just having an open mind about it in general, like not really doing anything about it per se, but just having an open mind about it. Like like you said, listening to podcasts, having conversations with friends, just viewing people that have a positive relationship. So you're like, oh, I guess it could happen. Like it happened with them. So that's good. And sometimes those are really hard to find, but at least I see something.
Absolutely. And what's coming to mind for me is like what I think could be relatable is think about if fitness is really important to you, if your health and fitness is very important to you, and that is a goal of yours to be in your best shape. If you end up with a terrible injury, right? But let's say, so your arm, so you've completely injured your arm, you can't continue the bodybuilding competition you were in, okay, just as an example, it doesn't mean you shouldn't still walk every day, right? So if this is something that's important to you, turn the dial all the way back, which can feel crazy, right? Going from a relationship and maybe about to get married, and then something happens, and now you're like suddenly single again, and it's shocking. That really sucks, but it still doesn't mean that we can't walk, right? Even if it's up and down the stairs 2 times a day, because we know deep down this is important to us.
Yeah, something very simple that I've done in the past when I'm feeling this way and I'm at like a 10, maybe a 5%, and I'm trying to get up at least to a 10. Something that I've done in the past, which just might sound really simple, is just going to a coffee shop and working and just kind of observing people and maybe having an opportunity to just say hi to somebody, like without any sort of romantic intention or anything, but specifically female. You know what I mean by that? Of course, I'll talk to men as well, but I'm heterosexual. So just having a little bit of that interaction just helps me realize that like people still like interacting, you know, to where I don't have to worry about like, we're going to go on a date or I'm going to try to pick this person up. I'm not asking for their number or anything else, but I just want to like, just like a smile, just like a
Yeah.
hi,
Yeah.
nice to see you. And that to me sometimes gives me enough to be like, oh, okay, I guess the whole world's not over. I guess I'm not
100%.
cynical on everything.
You are really speaking my language. I actually have a framework for this with that I do in my group coaching. I do with clients, which is just called the small talk challenge. And it doesn't have to be anything romantic. It could be a pregnant woman, it could be a grandmother, it doesn't matter. But talk to women often.
Mm,
The hello, thank you, have a great day. Like keep that energy exchange flowing with women
mm,
because um I've just seen so many men who they have retreated so far back that it has been so long that they've even spoken to a woman, and even telling a woman like the barista at Starbucks, even saying like thank you to her is uncomfortable. Like that's how long it's been. That's how little experience they have at this point. Um, so just that practice of actively speaking to a woman each day, like really leaning into it, making a conscious effort, it is wild how the wonders that has done for men in taking a few steps forward. One thing I want,
I go
yeah,
ahead.
one thing I wanted to come back to, I just remembered from what you were saying before about this, like wallowing and, just really getting into the feels and not being able to come out of it. So one of the things I teach, and anybody can look this up. I don't know if you're familiar with the emotional guidance scale. So there is a widely used universal scale called the emotional guidance scale. There's 22 emotions on it, all emotions that we're familiar with. And at the very, very top is joy, contentment, happiness, all the good feel emotions. And then as we start to get into the middle, there's things like overwhelm, frustration, like the things that we feel on a day to day that aren't even that bad, but we feel it. And then as we go down, we're getting into like the despair, depression, jealousy, like those bottom feeding emotions. Why this is so helpful is because when you are starting to live in that lower part of the emotional guidance scale where you're always in, I call it your energetic baseline, you're always angry, you're always depressed, you're always disappointed, you're always jealous, envy, that's a really clear sign that it is time to get out of that phase. And one way to do it, and why this scale is so powerful, is because people will say to you, well, just be positive. She'll come around, and you cannot jump from despair to joy. You
Yeah.
just can't do it. It doesn't work. So, what you need to do is actually slowly climb up the scale. And if you look at it, you can say, okay, I'm feeling despair. Believe it or not, anger is actually a better feeling emotion than despair. Like there's something moving in you now. There's some passion in there. So you look at it and you say, okay, what do I need to do? What activities can I do that will move me just 2 or 3 emotions up? And that is something like going for a walk, walking into a coffee shop and getting your coffee from there instead of making it in your dark kitchen, and slowly moving up this scale into better feeling emotions. And then, because once you're there, in order to deal with the hard stuff, it's very challenging to deal with life from such a low place. And that's where distraction can actually be a very handy tool, because if you're sitting at home wallowing, that is a perfect example of, okay, I need to get up and get into my masculine energy and start taking action and speak to the friend or go for the run, start moving the body, getting the brain working. And from there, yes, you'll be like, okay, I can deal with this.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think about things like the stages of grief as an example, that, they're not linear. You bounce
Mhm.
all around when you're going through a grieving process. We've talked about it on the podcast before. If you're interested about the stages of grief, just go find the podcast about grief. We talk all about it. But the reason I bring that one up is that sometimes, like you said, moving from like despair or depression to anger is healthy, because then you're at least feeling something and you have some passion, you have some sort of opinion and idea of what's going on. And if you're in despair, most likely that anger is just shoved way down there. It's still there. It's just you're not allowing it to come out. And especially, as there's a lot of different opinions about this right now with men, and anger is usually an acceptable emotion for men. But right now we live in a world where even that is not acceptable anymore. So we're not supposed to get angry, apparently. At least that's what everybody, social media and everything else, tells me. But anger can be a very healthy emotion because I'm getting it out, right? It doesn't mean that I go punch somebody in the face. There's different ways of dealing with anger, but that way I can get it out of my body. And then I don't despair anymore, because it actually gives me some confidence with that anger, right? It gives me some, oh, okay, I actually do believe in things. Oh, that's good. And then all of a sudden I'm feeling good about myself because of the fact that I'm doing something. So I love that you said that.
Yeah. And I think what you just said is so nice, because it's such a reminder that all of those emotions above are there. So the
Right.
joy is there, right? And it is, if you look at the scale, it's almost like in that order. It's like we have to get the anger out in order to get to the frustration. And we get the frustration out in order to feel like bored. And then we get the boredom out in order, and then we slowly move up. So know that the joy is still there. Like it does, it's available to you. It just may require a little bit of peeling back the layers.
I love that. So real quick for the listeners, go check the show notes right now, because we're going to add the emotional guidance scale, because I think that's something really good to add right there. And also on that note, Kavita, let's just take a moment to say that we're also going to add your information down in the resources, because and here's, it's going to be a question for you, but going back to the whole intuition, gut, God, universe thing again, if you are a man and you're trying to figure out all of that yourself, good for you. And it's okay to ask for help, because frankly, I have a very strong gut, a very strong intuition. I know when I should do things most of the time, and most of the time it proves to be good for me. And I still wear a lot of filters where I think it's my gut and I'm convincing myself it is, and it's not. And I still need people in my life to point that out to me. And
Mhm.
I think, Kavita, you're an amazing resource for that. So is there anything specifically that we should put in the resources that people can find as far as that goes?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for saying that. I do have a thought. So I'm going to write it down and come back to it, just about like, taking opinions from the people that love you and know you best. But what I wanted to offer your audience, and you tell me if this would make sense, is I have a guide for if you are wanting to get back out there. I have Coach K's Ultimate Approach Women Handbook. So it's not just about approaching women, but it really is about getting back into the dating scene. And I put a lot of emphasis on the in-person approach, like actually meeting women organically, and all the ways you could possibly do it. Like exactly how to land a phone number, exactly what to say, exactly how to start this connection. And even from the standpoint of like making friends with women, going back to the dating dial, where maybe it's not a relationship, but what about getting comfortable around women again? What about spending time with women um platonically, where you are just learning about women and what it's like to be in a woman's energy and space, and even getting advice from women, right? That's why I love doing what I do, because men have been very naturally drawn to my work. Even when I was coaching women, at one point I was coaching women and men, and I didn't realize at the time that I always had double the number of male clients.
Hmm.
And I think it could be
Why do you
really
think that
nice.
is?
I think that if you don't have kind of female energy in your life, female guidance in your life, if you're surrounded by a lot of other single guys or even men in relationships, it can feel quite lonely, because you may not have a safe space to let your feelings out, to actually say, I'm really scared, I'm not going to meet someone. And a woman is very good at kind of like giving you the space to feel that, while holding you in your masculinity without taking that away from you, which I think, not consciously, your best friends and your buddies, like, they only want the best for you, but they may be doing it unconsciously because they themselves don't know how to sit in those feelings, or they've never expressed that, or they've never been vulnerable, or they've never had to be when it comes to relationships, because they got married early and they don't know what it feels like to be alone and worried. But I think women naturally can understand that feeling and those fears, even if they haven't specifically experienced it.
I think that's so critical, and I think it's especially critical that it comes from somebody like you, because I know, maybe some men are worried, and maybe you've had this. I don't know. Have you had guys like flirt with you while you're doing coaching with them? Has that happened?
It has not happened. I
Really?
think,
That's
yeah,
surprising.
yeah, I think that's part of why this was meant to be my life's work. Maybe I give off, I mean, not maybe, I obviously give off a very specific energy, where I am really, first of all, I'm in a long-term relationship. I think I don't talk about it often, but I don't think I give off like single girl energy.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
I don't, I just, I
The only
obviously,
reason the only reason I brought that up, and
yeah,
again, it surprises me just given the work that you do, because I've
yeah,
talked to many like female therapists and everything else, and some, you get emotional and vulnerable with somebody, and it's sometimes it just happens, right? But the reason that I'm saying this, and the reason I want everybody to pay attention and to call Kavita, her stuff's down below, is for this reason. I know for myself, sometimes I have thought that a woman was safe when she wasn't, or I thought that somebody was safe to, and it's, I would say, as a man, you got to be really careful who you're vulnerable with, who you open up to, etc., because you don't necessarily always know everybody's motives. And frankly, not to sound like an old man right now, but living in a society where relationships don't seem to mean anything to a lot of people, and they can be in a relationship and who cares, because then they'll just be with another, I've found that out the hard way, right? Talking to married women or people that have been partnered for a long time, and I thought it was above board and I didn't think I was flirting, but I'm kind of a flirty person, so maybe they took it wrong, etc. And then all of a sudden I'm in this conversation that I don't want to be in. I'm like, oh, whoa, 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 whoa. Like I wasn't trying to go down that road. I just really wanted your advice as a woman. So I guess the only reason I'm saying that is I'm sure that this has happened to other men. I'm not the only man in the world that this has ever happened to. So that's why I think what you do is so critical. And and it's even better, obviously, that you're in a relationship and a fulfilled relationship. That's even better. But I just think that I would encourage men, two things. Number one, be really careful. I talk about this a lot. There's a difference between honesty and privacy. So, just if you want to live an honest life, it does not mean that you have to tell everything to everyone. There are still elements of privacy that are good. You can still be honest and private. Easy example, I don't tell my children things that are meant for adult ears. That would be private. Does that mean I'm being dishonest with them? No, I try to be as honest as possible with them based on their age and what I think is appropriate for them, right? It's the same thing with women, and be very careful with women friends specifically too, just because you don't want to give off the wrong impression. You don't want them to get the wrong idea, and they might not be safe. Somebody like Kavita is safe. So thank you for doing the work you do. That's awesome.
Thank you. I have so many things to say.
Go ahead,
So
jump
much.
on one of them.
Okay, so first thing I'm going to say is the guide that I want to offer. So anyone can DM me on Instagram. If they just send me the word starter, I will send over my guide. And this is like a treasure trove of resources, just things to read through and watch that will really help you step back into the dating scene. No matter like if you want to turn the dial up to 20 or 100, there will be something there for you.
Are you
So
offering this for free?
I'm offering this for free.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's awesome. Thank
So
you
it's
so
just going
much.
to be, a guide. So my Instagram is at dashing date. I guess it'll be in the show notes, but yeah, DM me start and starter,
What did
and
you say?
I'll send
Starter?
that
Yeah,
out
starter. Perfect.
free to
Well,
anyone
and
who
I just want to spend a quick minute on this too. If you're listening to this, this is a huge deal, everybody, that she's offering this for free. Now, you go online and you're like, people are always offering stuff for free. But honestly, most of the time that free stuff, I don't know about your experience, but my experience is that's garbage. It's not even worth anything anyway. And frankly, in order to make something that actually has meat and meaning to it, it takes a lot of work. So take her up on this. Go right there, show notes, Instagram, Kavita, starter, word
Thank you
starter.
so much.
Yeah.
I think they'll like it. They can let me know.
So
So
I have another question for you. I know you
yeah,
have other stuff too, but so this is I don't know. This is something that we'll see where this goes. There's a guy on Instagram right now that all of his ads basically say the same thing, and his line is he's like a dating coach for men, and what he says is, you don't ask fish how to go fishing. You
yeah.
ask the fisherman. I don't know. Have you seen this guy?
I mean, people say it in my comments, and especially on TikTok.
Do they? Does it? Yeah, it seems like it's going around a lot. And his whole point is like, well, I'm the fisherman. I'm a man. I know how. And I don't know. The whole just idea of that seems like maybe he's just trying to help men have sex with women. I don't know, just based on the analogy. But I'm just curious. Speak to it. Like, why do you think that a man having a woman coach? And I know you talked about it a little bit already, but is there anything else that you think is really valuable that you can bring that a man can't bring?
Yeah, the actual female perspective and what women are thinking. But with that said, I will say something. I, as a woman, obviously cannot speak for all women. And I share this with clients where even choose, if you are feeling called to work with a female coach, even choosing the right one is important, because if I had only ever worked with men ever, I'm not really bringing the voice of women who are on the dating scene and what they are experiencing.
True.
So I've coached men and women for a very long time, really up until I think 2 years ago. And that's when I realized like I have double the number of male clients than female. And I was like, you know what? It's so different. I really couldn't deepen my practice by catering to both men and women. And I really wanted to like focus and dive really deep into the needs of someone. And I was like, naturally, if men are naturally gravitating towards my teachings, even though at the time I was never trying to cater to men. And I think that's another amazing point. So men were coming towards me, even though my advice was almost more tailored towards women. So they wanted the insights of like what's happening on that side. Why is she giving this advice? Like they would be surprised that women were struggling also. So a lot of men have this idea that's like it's only hard for women. Women have only hard for men. Women have it easy. They have the pick of the crop, and it's so not true. In fact, I'll share it here. Men and women are mostly struggling with many of the same issues when it comes to dating. And they don't realize, and it really just comes down to a miscommunication issue on the way we think of these same struggles, the way we talk about them. And it's frustrating because ultimately the goal is the same, right? Like we have the
Right.
same end goal, but the path to get there is very different for men and women. But with all that said, I've worked with women for a very long time, over 10 years, and I really know the ins and outs and every corner and crevice of what women are thinking and struggling with and dealing, and how it feels to be approached and what they actually want, and do they want men to approach. So I bring all of that knowledge and expertise to the table, which is very valuable to a man.
I would agree. I mean, you're talking on a man's podcast right now that's mainly speaking to men, and you're a woman, right? Like there's a
Mhm.
reason I have women guests on here all the time, because I want to
Yeah.
hear the woman's perspective based on whatever it is that we're talking about.
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely agree. And I think that's really, really important. And, for those guys out there that are saying, oh, you got to go talk to the fisherman, I would just say, yeah, but what's the purpose? Like, are you actually trying to find somebody with a true, authentic connection? Because if you are, then I think, working with somebody like you makes a lot more sense for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I have a client who's had such wild success working with me. We're still working together, and it's not because he needs a coach. It's, I have this, um, Tim Grover said, the best of the best always want to get better. And I love a client who's like, we hit all the marks and then they want to double down. And they keep me as their coach so that they are just like so well rounded and really experiencing the relationships that they want to experience. This client has, I think, 4 sisters and like a female therapist, and lives with his mom, and he was like, very valid question before we started working together. He was like, I have so much female energy in my life, like, is and my sister actually said to me, his sister said to him, when he was thinking about working with me, she was like, maybe you should work with a guy because you're constantly surrounded by women, you're constantly getting female advice. um so that was a valid question. And maybe if you are grew up with sisters, have lots of female friends, and you are really connected with that side of you, maybe it would be a good idea to choose a male coach.
I've
I think,
experienced that a lot with the men that I coach. Honestly, a good amount of them do have a lot of female influences, and they need some
yeah,
strong male influences. And
yeah.
there's not a lot of strong male influences in the world today, I don't think. So you gotta find something. You got to bring in that masculine energy. I would completely agree with you.
I think, at the end of the day, like what I told him, I said, do not, like, your decision to work with me should not be based on my gender. Like, actually, don't make the decision at this point with where you're at. Make it based on what I teach, my values. Do you want the life that I want, that I have? Do you want to feel the way I feel, right? So you want to choose, ultimately, let's, remove all that, but you want to choose mentors and coaches that have achieved the thing that you want to achieve.
100%. Yeah.
So that's it. So I'm living my dream life right now. My partner and I work together on my business. We travel the world together. We are in a beautiful relationship. We have gone against the herd in many ways. We lived together. We're 12 years we're not married. We don't have kids yet. And we're just living our best lives. We want kids. Like, there's a lot here that people aspire to have. Um, I've completely changed my life around. I'm a very happy person. I have the tools and practices. So you want to choose someone. It's like, if you want, marriage and kids immediately, and, a specific kind of career and living on a farm, like, choose a coach who's kind of like gone through,
Yeah,
like,
I
done
was just
this.
gonna say, you're not for everybody, just like everybody else isn't for everybody, right? Like,
Exactly.
maybe you're a divorced guy that was married and has children and wants to work with somebody that's been divorced. Great, then go find that person, right? So yeah, I would agree with you, and that's what's beautiful about what you do.
One thing I'll share, and I think people, I've gotten much better at opening up about this, and I think people wonder about me, like, well, or I think people can make the assumption, like, oh, well, it's easy. Like, again, it's easy for women, or it's, it could be easy. But I actually lost my partner in a car accident when I was 26.
Mm.
And so it hasn't been easy for me, and I think a lot of people relate to me because I've been in that situation, at it's in the worst, like, on the end of the, like, at the other end of the spectrum. So no, whether it's divorce or the worst breakup ever, or feeling like you're going to be alone forever, I've gone through that in the worst way possible, feeling like this is never going to happen for me again. My whole life is ripped away from me. The marriage, the kids, like, that whole path just disappears literally in an instant. So I do understand that. And I think that's why, I've actually worked with men in their 70s who have lost their wives, and they can relate to me because more than people who have not gone through an experience like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that those experiences, and if we're vulnerable with those, are what really connect us, right?
Hmm.
So it's awesome that you're authentic about it and actually sharing those
Yeah,
experiences with the
it
open.
took me a long time to be able to openly share it, especially, without actually, this is a really good time to bring up what you said earlier, which is you're right in that time does not heal all wounds, because this is, 13 years later, and it's still very challenging. Am I happy and healthy and healed in so many ways? And obviously in a new partnership that I never thought I never thought I could be this happy. Um, but yeah, time, I wouldn't say time heals all wounds, not fully at least.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and you've obviously done, I mean, you can tell just from talking to you that you've obviously done the work during those 13 years as well, right? And but it doesn't mean that it's not like, I'm such a like get it done type of guy often. I just want everything to be a light switch, and I just want to be like, done, right? Like
Yeah,
we broke up,
that would
no
be nice.
feelings, no
Yeah.
grief, no nothing, just go find somebody else. Like it just doesn't work that way. It just doesn't, especially when you have a tragic loss like that. Like it doesn't go away. If you love
It
that
doesn't
person, you're with
go.
that person, it just doesn't disappear.
There's a Robert Frost quote, and it's the only way out is through.
Hmm.
And it's like, it's gonna come up. I remember actually when this first happened, there was like a period where I was like, am I fine? Like, I think I healed too quickly from this. Like, it is such a tragedy that you are trying to figure out how to deal with it. But yeah, that came back in all the ways. So, facing your hard, when people say like choose your hard, well, like not dealing with it is hard and dealing with it is hard. But one is actually the shortcut. One is when you zoom out, one is the light switch, and that is facing the thing.
Yeah, going through it. Absolutely. And I just want to point something out too, especially to all the men watching this podcast right now. If you're watching, if you're listening, maybe you can see this as well, but go watch it. Because one thing that I think is very evident about you right now, Kavita, is the fact that you went through this and you're honest and authentic about your experience. And you're talking about like this was difficult. There's still moments that are difficult, and you're very honest about that. But going back to a previous comment we talked about, it's very clear that you're not wallowing in it, right? You're
Not
in a
well.
healthy, loving relationship. You've been doing that for a long time. You've worked on your hurt, etc. And the reason I wanted to point that out, especially to the men that are watching you right now, is I think it's a really good indication when you are talking to a woman or maybe dating a woman that has gone through that. I'll just give a personal example. I went on several dates with a woman several years ago, and it only lasted several dates. And here's the reason why. I think it was 3. But the reason why is because she literally wouldn't stop talking about her dead husband. That happened, I think it was about 10 to 12 years earlier. So she was around the same time as you. And it wasn't the fact that she was talking about him. I'm good with what you just did. Be honest, be authentic. Like that's part of your story. I get it. We're getting to know each other. I'm getting to know your story. It would be like me just never talking about my divorce. Like it's a part of my story. So we should talk about it. But she clearly couldn't move past it 10, 12 years later. So again, time didn't heal wounds for her. Like I mean, what I literally felt like saying to her the last time we dated is like, don't date anyone ever again until you go take some time to heal this part of you, because you're bringing it up with every person you meet. And, at that time, several years ago, she was already in her late 40s. I'm like, look, you could keep doing this for another 20 years, but I just think it's also a good radar check for guys. Like, is somebody honest and authentic about it, which is a huge quality that I look for in a woman, or are they not able to move past it? Like they're a victim and the whole world is evil because they took their partner away from them. And the only thing I wanted to show you before we end here is that I was using this coffee mug just for you today.
Okay.
Because I was thinking, I was like,
Becoming
that's a
legal.
good one for what we're going to be talking about. And I
I
want to show you one other thing too. Can you read my
yeah.
shirt?
Yeah, I was looking at it before. The version of me you created in your mind is not. Oh.
Let's see if I can do this. Can you see it?
Is not my responsibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I,
100%.
I had that made after one of my relationships ended. And I think, I don't know, let's just maybe end with that. And I want to hear if you have any additional thoughts for people as we end. But one of the hardest lessons that I've learned going through different relationships and different transitions from relationships is just that. It's really hard for me to, it has been in the past, just to stay with who I am and to make sure that I'm working on the version of myself that I am comfortable with and that I'm growing into the version of myself that I want to be versus just focusing on everybody else. And I know for me, when I've had trouble in dating, it's been because I've been insecure about who I even am. And I feel like I need to act like a chameleon, or I need to act like some different person, or I need to go like take dating tips and tricks from whoever, the little black book of somebody that's just trying to like get girls to sleep with them or whatever, right? Where that all comes from insecurity. Because I don't know if you agree with this statement or not, but I found that the most success I've ever had with women dating, etc., has just been I've just been my confident self, and I've just walked in a room, and then women are just like, "Who the hell is that?" Like
Right.
you bring the energy, right?
Yeah.
I guess I'm wondering for guys that are, again, either going through a transition right now, maybe they've recently gone through a transition. Obviously, this probably applies to women as well. But are there any kind of last things that you would say to encourage them to kind of get back to that place where they're just comfortable with themselves and their version of themselves that they want to be?
Yeah. A couple things come to mind. I mean, in the realm of dating, just like you can't learn a sport without playing it, you are not going to be your best self with women and in dating without being in the dating world in some capacity and learning about yourself. With that said, that finding that balance between the doing and the being is really important. So if you are in this zone and you really recognizing that you are constantly distracted, there's constant noise in your ear, you are constantly asking others for their opinion of you, you can't make decisions for yourself, that whispering is not there, you feel disconnected from your intuition, that can be a challenging place to be. And when you're in that zone, you can very much be at the mercy of whatever comes your way. I kind of like the analogy of like a sail versus like being the anchor. So when you're anchored in and you're feeling good and you have clarity about who I am, what I am, then you're not going to be just kind of like blowing with the wind. And in order to do that, you want to find that balance between the doing, but also the quieting down, listening to those whispers. And the way to connect with your intuition is by slowing it down, doing doing the work. So the talking, the journaling, the meditating, the breathing, and sitting with yourself, like really facing the feelings.
I love that. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so
Appreciate
much,
you.
Josh. This
Appreciate
is so
you. And
nice.
as a reminder to everybody watching or listening, resources down below. Send Kavita the message starter to her
Starter,
Instagram
yes.
in order to get that ultimate approach notebook. And also, as usual, if you like the episode, please like. If you're listening to this and you're not on YouTube, could you do me a favor and get on YouTube and go like it and comment on it? And comment on something you disagree with too. Kavita and I are both open to that. Like, it brings up forth conversation, right? Whether you
Tell
loved
us.
it, you hated it, I don't care. Just
Yeah.
comment on something. That way we can have a conversation. We can have some civil discourse, which I'm all about.
Yeah,
So
we are
again,
anchored in.
what's that?
We won't. I said we're anchored in. We won't be swayed
Yeah.
by the negative
we
comments.
have enough confidence in ourselves, even though I'm sure we both have our own insecurities to be able
They're
to
there.
deal with that. But thank you all again to everybody for being here. Kavita, thank you so much for joining us. This is really good stuff. I know it meant a lot to a lot of people. So again, subscribe, like, and until next time, we'll see you later, you derelicts.